The village of Adaora sat like a bruise on the face of the savannah, small, dry-tongued, and forgotten by the gods who had turned their eyes toward richer kingdoms to the south. Its people were farmers mostly, scratching grain from reluctant earth, bartering fish from the nearby river, and praying to ancestors who seemed to have grown deaf with distance. It was the kind of place where children were born, knowing that the world did not think of them. They were told this before they could walk, taught it in the slant of their father's shoulders, the silence of their mother's prayers. Kofi was born in the season of dry winds, when the harmattan came down from the north and covered everything in a fine pale dust. His mother, Abena, named him for the Friday child, the one born of peace. She pressed her lips to his temple the night he arrived and whispered that he was her answered prayer, the son she had begged the river goddess for across 7 dry seasons. His father, Nana Kweku, was a man of medium build and large pride, a man who could not read but knew the stars by name and pointed them out to Kofi before the boy could fully form sentences. They were not wealthy, but they were whole. That wholeness shattered in Kofi's 9th year. The slavers came in the night, as they always did, as if darkness were their ally, their co-conspirator in the business of undoing lives. Kofi remembered the sound first, a low, organized thunder that was not thunder, the beat of many feet, the jingle of metal, shouted commands in a language he did not know. He remembered his mother pulling him beneath the sleeping mat, pressing her hand so firmly over his mouth that he tasted the salt of her palm. He remembered her breathing, rapid, shallow, terrified, and the way it slowed when they found her. He did not see them take her. He heard it. He did not see them take his father either, but he heard that too. When it was over and the silence returned, the village of Adaora was a different place. Not destroyed, the huts still stood, the cooking pots still held cold porridge, but emptied of a particular kind of spirit. Kofi crawled from beneath the mat and stood in the doorway of his home and looked out at a world that had, in the space of a single night, become enormous and merciless. They found him 3 days later, surviving on river water and the generosity of an old widow named Mame, who had survived the raid by hiding in the river shallows with the crocodiles. She fed him yam porridge and held him when he cried, but she could not keep him. She had nothing. When the traders came through on their route eastward, she surrendered him with weeping eyes and a muttered prayer, pressing a small carved bead into his palm. A blue bead, round and smooth as a pebble, that his mother had worn in her hair. Kofi was 9 years old when he was taken. He was clutching that blue bead when the shackles closed around his wrists. The estate of Lord Ekundayo was 3 days' journey from the coast, situated behind walls of whitewashed clay and shaded by enormous mango trees that made the compound feel, from the outside, almost pleasant. Inside those walls was a different world entirely, one of rigid hierarchy, invisible rules, and consequences delivered swiftly and without discussion. Kofi arrived malnourished, sunburned, and so quiet that the head steward, a tall, severe woman named Serwa, initially mistook him for mute. She assigned him to the kitchen, where he would be worked hard but at least fed consistently. She looked at him the way one looks at a piece of furniture, evaluating utility, not worth. He was given a sleeping mat behind the grain store. He was given a new name. The estate did not use the names that children came with, preferring shorter, easier syllables that fit into a command the way a key fits a lock. They called him Boy. Just boy, as if to have a name would be to admit personhood, and personhood complicated the arrangement considerably. Kofi, boy, folded his real name up like a piece of cloth and stored it somewhere deep inside himself, in a place they could not reach. He kept the blue bead, too, sewn into the hem of his wrap, where no one would find it. The first months were the hardest. Not for the work. He had been raised to work, knew the satisfaction of effort. But for the loneliness. The other servants avoided the children who arrived new. Attachment was a liability in a place where people disappeared without explanation. Kofi learned to eat alone, to move quietly, to become the sort of person that walls forgot they had witnessed. But a child, even a suffering one, cannot seal himself entirely from the world, and the world, even a cruel one, sometimes offers unexpected gifts. His gift came in the form of the estate's library. Lord Ekundayo was a man of commerce and vanity, and one of the things he was vain about was his collection of books. Hundreds of them in languages Kofi had never seen, imported from trading partners across the sea, and arranged on shelves of dark wood, with a care that seemed almost loving. The Lord rarely read them. They were, for him, ornaments. But they were real books, real words, real worlds, sealed in pages. Kofi discovered the library by accident on his third month on the estate, when he was sent to polish the adjoining anteroom, and found the door to the book room standing open. He stepped inside and stood very still, overwhelmed by the smell, something ancient and papery and slightly sweet, like dried flowers, and felt, for reasons he could not explain, that he was standing somewhere sacred. He could not read, but he could look. He could run his fingers along the spines and feel the embossed letters and imagine what sounds they made. He began to come back whenever he could, whenever there was a free hour in the early morning or the blue dusk of evening. It was there that Nana Ama found him. Nana Ama was the daughter of Lord Ekundayo's head scribe, a small, serious girl of about 12, who had inherited her father's love of learning and her mother's absolute refusal to be told what she could or could not do. She found Kofi sitting cross-legged on the library floor, with a book open in his lap, staring at the page with an expression of intense, almost painful concentration. She did not chase him away. She sat down across from him and asked, "Can you read?" "No," he said. "Do you want to?" He looked up at her. Nobody had asked him what he wanted in a very long time. The question hit him somewhere behind the sternum, like a stone dropped into deep water. "Yes," he said. "Yes, I want to." And so Nana Ama, who was not supposed to be teaching servants anything, began to teach Kofi to read. They met in the library 3 mornings a week, early, before the house stirred. She was a patient teacher, more patient than her sharp demeanor suggested, and Kofi was the kind of student who made patience easy, attentive, retentive, and driven by a hunger that went far beyond curiosity. He understood instinctively that knowledge was a kind of freedom that nobody could shackle, that what entered his mind became permanently and irrevocably his. Within a year, he could read. Within 2, he was reading faster than Nana Ama herself. He read everything: histories, trade ledgers, agricultural records, philosophical texts he only half understood, legal documents that made him sit very still and breathe very carefully. Within the texts, he began to understand the architecture of the world that had swallowed him. How power moved, who held it, what justified it, and, most importantly, what its weaknesses were. He kept all of this folded inside himself, beside his name, beside the blue bead. He waited. When Kofi was 14, Lord Ekundayo's fortunes shifted. A trade dispute with the Northern Merchant Consortium cost him 3 seasons' profit and more. Critically, his line of credit with the coastal banking houses. The estate contracted. Servants were sold. Kofi was transferred as a line item in a ledger to a trading post near the river, where a merchant named Alhaji Musa operated a business that moved goods and occasionally people between the interior and the coast. Alhaji Musa was different from Lord Ekundayo in a way that mattered. He was practical before he was proud. He evaluated people the same way he evaluated cargo, by what they could do, not by what they were. Within 3 weeks of Kofi's arrival, he noticed that the boy could read. Within a month, he had moved him from carrying bales to keeping records. "You write well," Alhaji Musa said one evening, reviewing Kofi's inventory log with raised brows. "Who taught you?" "A girl," Kofi said, which was true. Alhaji Musa grunted. "A girl with sense, then." He tossed the ledger back. "You'll do the correspondence from now on." Correspondence meant letters. Letters meant relationships. Relationships meant that Kofi began, slowly and carefully, to build a map of the commercial world. Who owed whom? Who was trustworthy? Which routes were profitable? Which were dangerous? Where money accumulated? And where it leaked? He absorbed all of it. He made himself indispensable by being better at his work than anyone who had previously done it, and by never letting anyone see how much he understood. He also ran once. It was a disastrous attempt. He was caught 2 days from the trading post, returned in chains, and given a punishment he did not allow himself to fully remember afterward. But the attempt taught him something crucial. Physical escape, at this stage, was not the road. He was 15, malnourished for 6 years, in unknown territory, with no money and no allies. Running was a child's solution to an adult problem. He needed another kind of escape. He needed leverage. He stored that lesson with all the others and continued to wait. When Kofi was 17, a man came to the trading post who would change everything. He arrived in a canoe with 2 servants and a crate of unusual cargo. Not cloth or grain or metal, but instruments. A compass, a brass sextant, several rolled maps drawn in a precise and elegant hand, and books. Books on navigation, books on cartography, books on surveying. The man's name was Mensa, and he was a freedman, born enslaved, manumitted in his 20s by an act of his own ingenuity, now operating as an independent cartographer and surveyor for a consortium of European and West African merchants who needed accurate maps of the interior river systems. Kofi recognized immediately what Mensa was. He recognized it the way you recognize a version of yourself, a possible self, a future self. And the recognition was so intense, it was almost painful to look directly at. He found a way to speak to Mensa alone, on the 3rd evening of the man's stay at the post. "I know what you do," Kofi said, in the careful, correct Portuguese he had taught himself from a trader's manual. "I want to learn it." Mensa regarded him for a long moment. He was a compact man, with grey at his temples, and eyes that had learned to evaluate quickly. "You're the factor's servant," he said, in the same language. "I'm his property," Kofi said, making the distinction deliberately. "I am nobody's servant." Something shifted in Mensa's expression. Not pity, which Kofi would have resented, but recognition. "I cannot take you with me," Mensa said. "If I helped you escape, there would be consequences for me and for you." "I'm not asking you to take me," Kofi said. "I'm asking you to teach me. While you're here, whatever you can, in whatever time we have." Mensa was quiet for a long time. The river made its sounds in the darkness nearby, its constant, untroubled voice, as if history and suffering were not happening on its banks. "You can read?" Mensa finally asked. "4 languages," Kofi said. Mensa looked at him differently after that. For the 10 days Mensa remained at the trading post, he and Kofi met every night in the space between last duties and sleep. And Mensa taught navigation, the reading of stars, the principles of cartography, the mathematics of distance and elevation. He taught with the urgency of a man who understood that 10 days might be all they had, and Kofi learned with the hunger of someone who had been starving for exactly this kind of knowledge for 9 years. When Mensa left, he left something else behind. Quietly, folded into the back pages of a ledger Kofi kept, a letter of introduction, a name, an address in the port city of Accra, and a small amount of money sewn into a pouch of oilskin. "When you are free," the letter said in Mensa's careful hand, "come find me." Kofi pressed the letter between his palms and felt something ignite in his chest. Not hope exactly, because hope was a feeling he had. Learn to approach with caution. Something older and harder than hope. Intention. Kofi turned 20 in chains, but he turned 21 as a free man. It did not happen through a single dramatic act, but through the slow, deliberate accumulation of leverage. He had over 3 years made himself the financial center of Al-Haji Musa's operation, not overtly, not boastfully, but in the deep and structural way that a river shapes stone over time. The accounts were in his head as much as in the ledgers. He had established correspondence relationships with merchants in 6 cities. He had, carefully and patiently, cultivated the knowledge of 2 particular facts: that one of Al-Haji Musa's primary creditors was a man named Atta, who resided in the northern trade town of Salaga, and that Atta was owed a debt the merchant could not yet repay. Kofi had also cultivated, over years of patient correspondence, a relationship with Atta himself. He did not threaten, he did not expose. He simply, one afternoon, sat across from Al-Haji Musa and laid out the arithmetic with the calm precision of a man presenting a trade proposal. His freedom, and the name of a route that would allow the merchant to settle his debt with Atta without losing face in exchange for a manumission document, witnessed and sealed. It was not an act of charity on Al-Haji Musa's part. It was business. The merchant recognized this, and perhaps in recognizing it, recognized for the first time that the boy he had treated as property had been, all along, a man with a mind like a ledger. Nothing entered it that was not eventually accounted for. The document was drawn up on a Thursday afternoon. Kofi walked out of the trading post compound into the evening air of the riverside and stood for a long time without moving, feeling the weight of a word he had been carrying for 12 years finally laid down. He pulled the blue bead from the hem of his wrap and held it in his palm. He said his own name out loud to the darkening river. Kofi. The river answered in its own language, unimpressed and continuous and entirely indifferent, which was exactly what he needed. He did not return immediately. He was not ready yet, and more importantly, the return he intended required resources that a manumitted young man standing by a river at dusk did not yet possess. He went first to Accra, found Mensa, and presented himself at the cartographer's door with 12 languages, the memory of a continent's worth of trade routes, and an aptitude for mathematical reasoning that made Mensa's eyebrows lift so high they nearly left his face. "You actually remembered everything I taught you," Mensa said. "I remember everything," Kofi said. "I've had to." He worked with Mensa for 4 years, learning the full craft of cartography and surveying, expanding his mathematical education, and contributing, significantly enough that his name appeared on 2 published maps, to a comprehensive survey of the interior river systems that was purchased by 3 different merchant guilds and a European Geographic Society. He was paid in coin and in reputation, and he invested both with the same methodical patience that had characterized everything he had done since the age of 9. He became slowly a figure of some significance in the commercial geography of the region. He was known for accuracy. He was known for reliability. He was known for a kind of cool, deliberate intelligence that made people trust him with their most valuable projects and their most sensitive information. At 28, he had enough. He had money, real money, the kind that commanded attention. He had allies, a network of relationships spanning merchants, missionaries, freedmen's organizations, and the correspondence desks of 2 European commercial houses. He had documentation, legal standing, and the kind of credentials that, in the complex and often unjust world of early colonial commerce, could be converted into protection and influence. He had the name of the village where his parents had been taken. He had traced the path of that particular raid through patient and meticulous research spanning years, through slave ship manifests and colonial records and the testimony of survivors. And he knew now with a certainty that sat in him like a stone where they had been taken, not whether they were alive. That he could not know. But where? He organized a small expedition, 2 assistants, a guide, a wagon of supplies. He presented it to the world as a surveying mission. To himself he presented it as what it was, a homecoming. The village of Adaora had not disappeared. Villages rarely do. They change, they contract, they shift, they survive with their foundations intact, even when everything above ground is transformed. There were new faces and old ones, new huts built over the foundations of old ones. The river was the same, the mango trees at the village entrance were taller than he remembered. He arrived on a Wednesday morning in a wagon, dressed in the clothes of a prosperous merchant, and the village turned out to watch, not in fear, but in the particular cautious curiosity of a community that had learned to be careful about strangers. He recognized almost no one. He was not sure anyone recognized him either. He had been 9 when he left, and 28 looks nothing like 9. He had grown tall, lean, and careful, with eyes that people often described as unsettling in their stillness. But one person recognized him. Mame, the old widow who had hidden in the river with the crocodiles, who had fed him yam porridge, who had pressed the blue bead into his palm. She was ancient now, leaning on a carved stick, her face a geography of years. But she looked at him across the market square, and her hands began to shake, and she said in a voice that cracked like old wood, "Friday, child." He walked to her and went down on one knee, which was not the custom for a man of his station, and she put her trembling hands on his face and held it and wept. The village watched. He told his story over 3 evenings, sitting in the compound of the village elder, with the community gathered around a fire that pushed back the darkness. He did not tell it for sympathy. He was past the age of needing sympathy. He told it because he believed that the story of his life, laid out plainly, was itself a kind of power, and because he wanted these people. the people of the village that had made him, to know that what had been taken from them had not been entirely lost. He told them about the library, about Nana Amma and her patient teaching, about the ledgers and the correspondence and the arithmetic of leverage, about Mensa and the maps, about the years of making himself into something they had no word for yet, a free man, a skilled man, a man of standing, a man who had converted everything done to him into fuel. He told them about the blue bead. He pulled it from his pocket and held it up in the firelight, and the crowd was very quiet. "My mother is alive," he said. "I found her. She is in the south, in a household in the coastal city. She is old. She is not free. But she knows I am coming." He paused. "I have already engaged legal representation from a commercial house in Accra that has significant leverage with the household in question. I have documentation, I have money, I will have my mother's freedom before the dry season ends." He looked around the fire at the faces, weathered, cautious, watchful, and felt something he had not allowed himself to feel in 19 years, the particular grief of love, the ache of belonging to a place that had suffered. "I am also bringing investment," he said. "I have made arrangements with the consortium in Accra for the construction of a proper trading post at the river crossing 4 miles east of here. Adara sits at the convergence of 3 trade routes that the merchants have not yet fully mapped. I have mapped them. The trading post will give this village access to those markets. It will mean income. It will mean that your children do not leave here desperate." He was not, he explained carefully, doing this from guilt or sentiment, though both were present. He was doing it because it was sound. The village of his birth, properly resourced and positioned, was a viable commercial enterprise. Investment here made sense. It also, he allowed himself to say, simply, made things right. In whatever small and material way, things could be made right. The elder, a slow-moving man of great dignity named Obanyan Nyo, was quiet for a long time after Kofi finished speaking. Then he said, "We thought you were dead." "I nearly was," Kofi said, "many times. And yet here you are. And yet here I am." Obanyan Nyo looked at him for a long moment. Then he said in the voice used for important pronouncements, "You were born Kofi, Friday child. We named you for peace, and you have returned with peace. The kind of peace that has teeth in it." The fire crackled. Somewhere, a night bird called. "Welcome home," the old man said.